Well, she sucked a little bit. No, it's cool. Mike Fessler, somebody else, we're not going to name names.
The emergency dispatch call came in at exactly 7:02 a.m. on Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. Someone was screaming on the 800 block of Bells Mill Road in Upper Roxborough, Philadelphia. The kind of screams that make your blood run cold. Desperate, terrified, the sound of someone discovering something they were never meant to see. When Philadelphia police officers arrived at the scene, just minutes later, what they found would send shockwaves through a tight-knit community that prided itself on knowing everyone's business. Between two parked cars, lying motionless on the cold asphalt, was the body of a man who had touched more lives than most people ever will. At 7:07 a.m., 38-year-old Jordan Baxter was pronounced dead. But this wasn't just any victim. This wasn't a random act of violence or a robbery gone wrong. Jordan Baxter was the kind of man communities rally around, the guy who'd drop everything to help a neighbor, the father who never missed his kids' homework time, the son who'd answer his aunt's call at 4 a.m. just to fix her streaming device. He was, by every account we've gathered, genuinely beloved. For 14 years, Jordan had been a dedicated regional rail engineer with SEPTA, navigating the busy routes that connect Philadelphia's sprawling neighborhoods. His colleagues knew him as reliable, his family knew him as devoted, and his friends knew him as the person they could count on when life got complicated. The kind of man you'd never expect to find dead in a parking area at dawn. So what was he doing there? Why was Jordan Baxter, who should have been getting ready for another day of keeping Philadelphia's trains running on time, instead lying lifeless between two cars near a home where he no longer lived? The immediate response from his community tells us everything we need to know about the man Jordan was. Within hours, social media was flooded with tributes. Within days, a GoFundMe campaign had raised over $21,000. Within 10 days, hundreds of people gathered for a memorial balloon release, sending red balloons, Jordan's favorite color, into the sky above the Murphy Recreation Center, a place where he'd spent countless happy hours. But here's what makes this case so devastating. Jordan wasn't just any father. He was raising 3 children, including a 15-year-old son with autism who required constant attention and care. Despite being separated from his wife and heading toward divorce, Jordan had never stopped being the provider, the protector, the one who made sure everyone in his family was taken care of. We've spoken to neighbors who describe the Baxters as a pleasant family with no issues. We've read testimonials from friends who called Jordan their Christmas baby, their rock, their go-to person for anything and everything. Everyone we've talked to paints the same picture: a man who gave everything he had to the people he loved. Which makes what happened to him all the more shocking. Because someone in Jordan's life, someone who knew his routines, someone who had access to his world, someone who understood exactly when and where to find him, decided that Jordan Baxter needed to die. The question that haunted investigators from the moment they arrived at that scene, and the question we're going to answer today, is simple. Who would want to destroy a man who spent his life building others up? What we uncovered about this family will shock you. But first, let us tell you about the man everyone thought they knew. Because understanding Jordan Baxter, really understanding who he was and how he lived, is the only way to comprehend how someone could plan and execute his murder. And make no mistake, this was planned, this was personal, and this was about to tear apart everything Jordan had worked so hard to protect. If you want to uncover the truth alongside us, hit that like button and subscribe to Crime Vault Stories. We're about to take you inside a case that proves sometimes the greatest danger comes from the people closest to home. To understand what happened to Jordan Baxter, we need to understand who Jordan Baxter was. Not the headlines, not the victim. The living, breathing man who somehow made everyone around him feel like they mattered. Jordan's aunt, Valerie Williams, still gets emotional talking about her nephew. She called him her Christmas baby. And when we heard the stories she shared, we understood why. This was a man who would show up. No matter what time, no matter what the problem, no matter how inconvenient, Jordan would show up. At 4 a.m., when Valerie's streaming device stopped working, who did she call? Jordan. Not a tech support line, not a neighbor, Jordan. Because she knew that within minutes, her phone would ring back with a solution, or better yet, Jordan himself would be at her door with tools in hand. He was always there for us. Always, Valerie told us. And the way she said it with such certainty painted a picture of reliability that's increasingly rare in today's world. But Jordan's dedication went far beyond fixing streaming devices and midnight emergency calls. This was a man who had built his entire life around service to others. At SEPTA, where he'd worked as a regional rail engineer for over a decade, Jordan wasn't just clocking in and clocking out. His supervisors knew they could count on him for the difficult routes, the overtime shifts, the assignments that other engineers might complain about. When passengers boarded Jordan's train, they were riding with someone who took genuine pride in getting them safely to their destination. Yet it was at home where Jordan's character truly shined. Every single night, not most nights, not when he felt like it, but every single night. Jordan sat down with his 3 children to help with homework. We're talking about a man who worked long shifts, operating heavy machinery, dealing with schedules and safety protocols that would exhaust most people, and he'd still come home and transform into a patient teacher. His oldest son's autism meant this wasn't just about checking math problems or reviewing spelling words. This required a level of attention, consistency, and specialized care that many parents struggle to provide, even under the best circumstances. Jordan never saw it as a burden. Friends and family members consistently described him as completely devoted to making sure his son had every opportunity to succeed. His cousin Anthony Lee shared something that stuck with us. He talked about the Murphy Recreation Center as Jordan's happy place. Not because Jordan was reliving his own childhood, but because watching Jordan with children at that playground revealed something special about his character. He was most happy, not a care in the world, just playing with his friends and having fun, Anthony told us. But what Anthony was really describing was a man who understood joy and knew how to share it. This wasn't someone who helped his kids with homework because it was expected. This wasn't someone who answered late-night calls out of obligation. This was someone who genuinely found fulfillment in making other people's lives easier, better, more stable. Jordan brought what friends called an uplifting persona to every situation. When family gatherings got tense, Jordan was the one who'd redirect the conversation. When friends were going through tough times, Jordan was the one they'd call for perspective. When coworkers were stressed about route changes or scheduling conflicts, Jordan was the one who'd find a way to make it work. Here's what makes Jordan's story so compelling. He wasn't performing goodness for recognition or praise. This was simply who he was. A man who measured his worth by how much he could give to the people in his life. We keep coming back to one detail that his family shared with us. Even as his marriage was falling apart, even as he was facing the emotional and financial stress of separation, Jordan never stopped being the provider for his entire family. Not just his children, his entire family, including the wife he was separated from. Most men in that situation might cut off financial support, might use money as leverage in a difficult divorce. Not Jordan. He understood that his children needed stability, and he was going to provide it no matter what it cost him personally. It's that level of selflessness that makes what happened next so much more devastating. By March 2025, Jordan Baxter was living a double life that few people fully understood. Publicly, he maintained the image of a dedicated family man. Privately, he was navigating one of the most emotionally complex situations we've encountered in our investigations. Jordan was no longer living in the family home on Bells Mill Road. He'd moved out, established his own space, started the painful process of rebuilding his life as a single man. But here's where Jordan's story becomes unlike most separation cases we've studied. He never really left. Every morning, Jordan would arrive at the house to help get the kids ready for school. Every afternoon, he'd return to supervise homework time. Every evening, he'd make sure dinner was handled and the children were settled for the night. Then he'd leave, driving back to wherever he was staying, only to repeat the cycle the next day. Think about the emotional toll of that routine. Most separated couples create boundaries, establish schedules, divide responsibilities. Jordan was essentially working two full-time jobs, his actual career at SEPTA and his self-appointed role as the family's primary caretaker. But it wasn't just about the children. Jordan was covering every expense for the household. Mortgage payments, utility bills, groceries, car payments, medical expenses, everything. His estranged wife, Danielle, wasn't working, and Jordan had made it clear that wouldn't change just because their marriage was ending. From the outside, this might look like admirable dedication. From the inside, we're starting to understand this arrangement was creating an incredibly volatile dynamic. Danielle was completely dependent on Jordan financially, but had no control over when he'd show up or leave. She was living in the family home, but essentially as Jordan's dependent rather than as an equal partner. The children were caught in the middle of a situation where their primary parent was someone who didn't actually live with them anymore. For Jordan, this setup meant he had all the responsibilities of being married with none of the emotional support or partnership that marriage provides. He was funding a household he couldn't come home to, caring for children he could only see during scheduled times, and supporting a woman who was legally still his wife, but emotionally had become something else entirely. The neighbors we spoke to had no idea how complicated things had become. When they saw Jordan's car in the driveway, they assumed he still lived there. When they saw him helping the kids with yard work or loading groceries, they saw a devoted husband and father. What they didn't see were the late-night arguments about money, the tension over custody arrangements, or the growing resentment that was building on both sides. We've learned that Jordan wasn't just visiting randomly. His presence at the house followed specific patterns: school mornings, homework time, family obligations. But on March 19th, something was different. Jordan was there at 7 a.m., well before his usual routine would require. What brought him back to Bells Mill Road that morning? Was it a planned visit, an emergency with one of the children? A confrontation that had been building for weeks? The timing is crucial because it tells us something important. Jordan didn't just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was there for a reason. And that reason brought him face to face with someone who had been planning for exactly this moment. Here's what we know for certain. Jordan's arrangement with his estranged wife wasn't sustainable. The financial pressure was enormous, the emotional strain was increasing, and the legal proceedings for their divorce were moving forward. Something was going to have to change. What we're beginning to understand is that for Danielle Baxter, the prospect of change wasn't just scary. It was terrifying. Because change meant losing the financial security that Jordan provided. Change meant potentially losing custody of the children. Change meant facing a future where she'd have to rebuild her life without the man who had been taking care of everything. But there was something else happening in Danielle's world. Something that would transform financial anxiety into deadly rage. And it had everything to do with what she believed about Jordan's reasons for wanting out of their marriage. 5 days before Jordan Baxter's murder, his wife posted something on Facebook that would make investigators' blood run cold. But at the time, it probably seemed like just another generic relationship complaint, the kind of vague social media drama that floods our feeds every day. On March 14, 2025, Danielle Baxter wrote, "These females out here be plotting on your marriage and waiting for your downfall so they can come right on in, and these men let them." Read that again, because hidden in those 22 words is the psychological blueprint for murder. This wasn't a random observation about relationships in general. This was a woman who believed, rightly or wrongly, that other women were actively working to destroy her marriage and steal her husband. More importantly, this was a woman who believed her husband was going to let them succeed. In our investigation, we've learned that paranoia about infidelity often becomes the final trigger in domestic violence cases. But Danielle's post reveals something even more dangerous than simple jealousy. She wasn't just worried about Jordan leaving her, she was convinced that he was being manipulated by other women who were orchestrating her downfall. The timing of this post is absolutely critical. March 14th was a Friday. Jordan would be dead the following Wednesday. That gives us a 5-day window where Danielle was publicly expressing her belief that women were plotting against her marriage and that Jordan was complicit in allowing it to happen. But here's what makes this social media activity so revealing. Danielle wasn't just venting frustration about her failing marriage. She was constructing a narrative where she was the victim of a conspiracy. In her mind, the breakdown of her relationship with Jordan wasn't about their incompatibility, their financial stress, or their inability to communicate. It was about external forces, specifically other women who were deliberately sabotaging her life. Thinking is incredibly dangerous because it removes personal responsibility from the equation. If other women are plotting against your marriage, then fighting back isn't just justified, it's necessary for survival. If your husband is being manipulated by these women, then extreme measures might be the only way to save your family. We've analyzed hundreds of social media posts from people who've later committed violent crimes, and Danielle's March 14th post fits a disturbing pattern. It's not emotional enough to raise immediate red flags, but it's specific enough to reveal a dangerous mindset. She wasn't just angry, she was paranoid. She wasn't just hurt, she was planning. The language she chose is particularly telling. Plotting, waiting for your downfall, come right on in. These aren't the words of someone who's sad about a failing relationship. These are the words of someone who views their marriage as a territory under siege. What we found most unsettling about this post is what it reveals about how Danielle viewed Jordan's desire for separation. In a healthy relationship, when one partner wants to end things, both people eventually accept that the relationship has run its course. But Danielle had convinced herself that Jordan's desire to leave wasn't really his decision at all. This delusion served a crucial psychological function. It allowed Danielle to maintain her identity as a devoted wife who was being betrayed, rather than accepting the more painful reality that Jordan simply didn't want to be married to her anymore. But delusions like this don't just stay in people's heads. They demand action. And when someone believes their marriage is under attack by external forces, they start looking for ways to eliminate those threats. We're about to show you how desperation and jealousy can turn deadly, because what happened next proves that Danielle's Facebook post wasn't just emotional venting, it was a declaration of war. The question we had to answer was simple. If Danielle believed other women were plotting to steal Jordan, and if she believed Jordan was allowing it to happen, what would she be willing to do to protect what she saw as rightfully hers? On March 19th, we got our answer. And it wasn't just about keeping Jordan away from other women. It was about making sure that if she couldn't have him, no one else could either. When the first officers arrived at that scene on Bells Mill Road, they immediately knew something was wrong. Not just because there was a dead body, but because nothing about what they were seeing made sense. Jordan Baxter's body was positioned between two parked cars, lying on a plastic sheet. A gun was resting on his chest. At first glance, it might have looked like suicide, or perhaps a robbery gone wrong. But experienced investigators know that crime scenes tell stories, and this scene was telling a story that didn't add up. The first major red flag was the gunshot wound itself. Jordan had been shot in the back of his head. Anyone with basic knowledge of ballistics knows that's virtually impossible to accomplish as a self-inflicted injury. People don't shoot themselves in the back of the head. Period. The second red flag was the gun placement. When someone commits suicide with a firearm, the weapon typically falls near the body, based on the angle of the shot and the person's physical position when they pull the trigger. It doesn't end up neatly positioned on the victim's chest like some kind of ritual arrangement. The third red flag was the plastic sheet. Suicides don't typically involve plastic sheeting, and robbery victims aren't usually found on carefully placed ground coverings. Someone had taken the time to position that plastic, which meant someone was thinking about containing evidence, blood, DNA, trace materials that might connect them to the crime. But the most damning evidence was discovered when investigators moved their attention from the parking area to the house itself. Inside the residence that Jordan had once shared with Danielle, detectives found blood on a mattress. Not droplets, not spatter from a minor injury, enough blood to indicate that significant violence had occurred in that bedroom. This discovery changed everything. It meant the crime hadn't happened outside where the body was found. Jordan Baxter had been killed inside the house, in what appeared to be a bedroom, and then his body had been moved to the parking area and arranged to look like something it wasn't. The physical evidence painted a clear timeline. Violence inside the house, death in the bedroom, body removal to the parking area, staging with the plastic sheet and gun placement, then likely a 911 call to report screaming in the neighborhood. This level of staging requires planning, physical strength, and access to the crime scene. It also requires knowledge of Jordan's schedule and movements. The killer had to know when Jordan would be at the house, had to have a plan for getting him inside, and had to be prepared for the aftermath. Moving a 38-year-old man's body isn't something you can do spontaneously. Investigators also discovered something that sealed their case. The staging was amateur. Professional criminals know how to make scenes look authentic. This looked like someone who had watched too many crime shows but didn't understand actual forensics. The gun angle was wrong. The blood patterns didn't match the supposed location of death, and the plastic sheet actually made the scene more suspicious rather than less. Within 24 hours of finding Jordan's body, police had enough evidence to make an arrest. On March 20th, 2025, Danielle Baxter was taken into custody and charged with murder, possession of an instrument of crime with intent, abuse of corpse, and tampering with and fabricating physical evidence. The speed of that arrest tells us everything we need to know about the strength of the evidence. Police don't charge someone with murder unless they're confident in their case, and they don't move that quickly unless the evidence is overwhelming. But here's what made this case particularly tragic. All of Danielle's staging efforts were pointless. The moment investigators found that blood in the bedroom, her entire story collapsed. All the careful positioning, all the theatrical elements, all the attempts to make Jordan's death look like something other than domestic violence, none of it mattered. The evidence was speaking louder than any lies she might have planned to tell. And what it was saying was clear. Jordan Baxter had been murdered by someone who had access to his home, knowledge of his routines, and the physical capability to move his body after death. Someone who lived in that house. Someone who slept on that mattress. Someone who knew exactly when and where to find him alone. Someone who had decided that if she couldn't control Jordan's life, she would control his death. Danielle Baxter sits in a cell at the Philadelphia Industrial Correctional Center tonight, held without bail, represented by a public defender, waiting for a legal process that will determine the rest of her life. Her preliminary hearing was scheduled for April 7th, 2025. Marking the beginning of what will likely be a long journey through the criminal justice system. But the real story of this case isn't happening in courtrooms or jail cells. It's happening in a house where 3 children are learning to live without the father who was the center of their universe. Jordan's children, ages 8, 9, and 15, are now in the care of their grandparents, Jordan's parents. These are kids who went to bed on March 18th expecting their dad to help them with homework the next day, expecting him to drive them to school, expecting him to be there for all the small moments that make up a childhood. Instead, they woke up to a world where their father was gone forever, and their mother was in jail for killing him. The oldest child, who has autism and relied heavily on Jordan's daily attention and specialized care, faces challenges that extend far beyond grief. The routine that Jordan had carefully built around his son's needs, the consistent homework help, the patient explanations, the structured support, disappeared in a single morning. Now his grandparents, who love him deeply but are decades older and dealing with their own grief, must somehow fill that void. We keep thinking about a detail Jordan's family shared with us. He was supposed to be their safety net. Even through the separation, even through the divorce proceedings, Jordan had made it clear that his children would never want for anything. He was their constant, their provider, their protector. In one violent moment, Danielle didn't just take Jordan's life, she destroyed her children's sense of security. The community response has been extraordinary. That GoFundMe campaign we mentioned earlier has now exceeded its goal, with hundreds of people contributing to ensure Jordan's children have financial support for their future. The balloon release at Murphy Recreation Center drew crowds of people who wanted to honor Jordan's memory, sending those red balloons into the sky as a promise that his impact on their lives would never be forgotten. But money and memorial services can't replace what these children have lost. They can't bring back bedtime stories, birthday celebrations, or the simple comfort of knowing their dad would always be there when they needed him. What makes this case so heartbreaking is how preventable it might have been. Jordan's friends and family had no idea that Danielle was spiraling into the kind of paranoid rage that leads to murder. The neighbors saw a pleasant family. The community saw a devoted father. No one saw a woman so consumed by jealousy and fear of abandonment that she was capable of killing the man she claimed to love. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Domestic violence doesn't always announce itself with visible bruises or police calls. Sometimes it hides behind social media posts about females plotting on your marriage. Sometimes it disguises itself as financial dependency or separation anxiety. Sometimes it explodes without warning, destroying lives in ways that ripple through generations. Jordan Baxter spent his life building people up. He was the guy who fixed streaming devices at 4 a.m., who never missed homework time with his kids, who supported his family even when his marriage was falling apart. He believed in taking care of the people he loved, even when it cost him everything. In the end, that generosity, that willingness to keep showing up, to keep providing, to keep caring, may have been exactly what put him in danger. Because for someone like Danielle, losing control over Jordan meant losing everything. And when some people face that kind of loss, they choose destruction over letting go. Tonight, Jordan's children are learning to fall asleep without their father's voice saying goodnight. His family is learning to navigate emergencies without their go-to person. His community is learning that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, wearing the mask of marriage and family. If this case has taught us anything, it's that we need to pay attention to the people around us, especially when they're going through difficult transitions. Sometimes a social media post isn't just venting, it's a warning. Subscribe to Crime Vault Stories because we believe in uncovering the truth behind cases that remind us how precious and fragile life really is, and how quickly love can become the most dangerous emotion of all.